They said I had nothing left, but they forgot the briefcase was still mine. I remember the exact moment I realized it. The day the movers left my house, stacking boxes and furniture into Clara and Derek's rented truck. Their smug faces practically oozed entitlement. Marianne had passed just 2 months prior, and grief pressed down like the humid Atlanta spring air. And yet, amid the loss, there remained this one thing: worn leather, brass lock, faint scent of her perfume lingering in its folds. That briefcase had been hers first, then ours. My inheritance, my tether to her. My last weapon in a war I hadn't asked to fight. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you were listening from. Clara's voice came first when I stepped inside. Dad, really, you don't need that old thing, she said, eyes darting toward the briefcase. Her words were syrupy, but I caught the edge beneath. Old thing? I asked, lifting an eyebrow. This old thing has been more trustworthy than anyone else in this house. Derek chuckled from the hallway. Careful, Clara. Don't want to hurt Dad's feelings. His tone was casual, but I smelled the faint cologne he always used to mask tension. The kitchen table was littered with crumpled receipts and hastily signed checks, some in the thousands. One caught my eye, a faded slip from their last grocery run totaling $2,800. You didn't even bother hiding this? I muttered, sliding it into my pocket. Clarisip's smile flickered. What are you talking about, Dad? You know exactly what I am talking about, I replied, calm but icy. Every receipt, every little number. Ethan entered then, his eyes sharp, scanning the room. Grandpa, that briefcase, he said quietly, nodding toward the desk. There's seps more here than just papers. It seps a map. I glanced at him. A map? He nodded, flipping open a notebook. Look at these amounts. They don't set line up with the statements. Someone S moving money behind the scenes. March afternoons in Atlanta carried a humid warmth, the streets bathed in golden light. I traced my fingers along the seams of the briefcase, feeling the tiny imperfections Marianne had stitched herself. Its lock clicked faintly under my touch. This is our secret, Ethan, I whispered, and soon it's going to be their undoing. Later I overheard Derek's phone call from the hallway. We'll transfer it quietly off the books. Make sure he doesn't see anything. His voice was low but clear. Clara murmured in the background. Keep him distracted. He seems too sentimental to notice if we time it right. I wrote down the time, 7:42 p.m., March 15th, and tucked it into the briefcase under a sheaf of old tax documents. The faint scent of Marianne's ink reminded me that no lie could hide when love had left traces in the margins. That night, Ethan sat across the table as I opened the briefcase. Look at this, he said, pointing to a series of crumpled receipts. March 12th, unauthorized withdrawals. I nodded. I saw it. Every crumpled bill, every ink smear, it seps all a trail. He paused. Grandpa, sometimes I misread dates. Don't set want to mislead us. That seps fine, I said. Double-checking is exactly what we need. Even mistakes can lead to breakthroughs. We cataloged letters Marianne had written, some never sent, others tucked between financial statements. One note read, Our life is more than numbers. Protect it, Alaric, as I would. I whispered to myself. I will, my love. Ethan flipped through another set of documents. Grandpa, look at this account. She had hidden something for emergencies. Only the two of us knew. A smile, small and private, crept across my face. She planned ahead, just like I will. The next morning I found myself in the kitchen. Clara scrolled through her phone, her eyes briefly meeting mine. A flicker of surprise or guilt passed over her face. Derek appeared behind her, shifting uneasily. Coffee sips is ready, I said aloud. My tone casual. Sit, talk if you like. Clara bit her lip, then whispered to Derek. He seps watching more than we thought. Donna sept leave anything visible. I heard every word. My chest tightened, not from fear but anticipation. They thought I was helpless. But the briefcase had already begun to speak. March 16th, arrived soft and golden. Ethan opened his notebook. Grandpa, start small, track every transaction, cross-reference receipts. If they think we set your sleep, They set you wrong. I nodded, touching the briefcase. Every crumb, every number we settle follow it, and soon justice will catch up with them. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the quiet of my Atlanta bedroom, listening to the faint hum of streetlights outside, the soft creak of the old house settling, and the distant murmur of Derek's late-night call through the thin walls. Check the transfers again. He's sniffing around the statements, I heard him say. Voice low, Clara murmured something I couldn't fully catch, just syllables that sounded like excuses and reassurance. My chest tightened. Even in grief they were plotting, and I had to stay alert. Ethan was at my side the next morning, leaning over my laptop. Grandpa, the lawyer confirmed it. The briefcase is legally yours. Everything inside your inheritance. Marianne Sepp's notes, it's Sepp's untouchable. I rubbed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I know, but knowing and feeling safe are different things, Ethan. He looked up at me, steady and calm. Then let my dips make them feel safe, until we set you're ready. The $699,842 tax notice stared back from the desk, a glaring reminder of the deception Clara and Derek had woven. I flipped it over, noting the small handwritten additions in pencil numbers that didn't match official statements. Small adjustments meant to disguise withdrawals. They think I won't notice, I muttered aloud. Ethan pointed to the margin. Here, see this date? March 3rd. That withdrawal wasn't set approved. Someone forged your signature. I clenched my jaw. Forged it? My own daughter forged my signature. He nodded. It sets worse than we thought. For a moment, despair threatened to consume me. I remembered Marianne's laughter in the kitchen, her hands warm around mine as we planned our future. Memories of birthdays, Christmases, and quiet dinners replayed, all tinged with betrayal now. I felt the weight of loss compounded by the audacity of my own child. I can't believe this, I whispered. You can, Ethan replied, and you can act. That day, I visited Miss Reynolds, our lawyer, at her office on Peachtree Street. Her voice was calm, measured, but firm. Alaric, the briefcase is undisputedly yours. We can start cataloging the evidence, file preliminary notices if needed, and prepare for eventual confrontation. She gestured to the stack of notarized letters and documents she'd brought. Everything you're worried about, the transfers, the discrepancies, they can be formally challenged. Legally, safely. I nodded, gripping my pen, noting each instruction. Every number, every document, every receipt became a piece in a larger puzzle. Back home, Ethan and I spread the papers across the dining table. He tapped a series of crumpled receipts. Look at this, Grandpa. $12,345 withdrawn February 18th. Look at the account it went to. It Seps a shell, no record of expenditures. Clara barged in, phone in hand. Dad, what are you doing? You shouldn't go through my things. I met her eyes calmly. These aren't sefted to your things, sefted Clara. These are accounts you seft been managing poorly, or dishonestly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Derek appeared behind her. Elaric. I don't think this is necessary, he said, voice tight. Let sits not make mountains out of molehills. I held the receipts up. $699,842, Derek. Tell me it seps a molehill. Tell me you didn't set forged signatures. They didn't answer. Just looked at each other, eyes flicking between the evidence and me, and for the first time a small crack appeared in their armor of confidence. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, Grandpa, I checked the numbers twice. Every unauthorized transaction lines up. They left a trail. I nodded, feeling a spark of resolve replace the despair that had gripped me. Then we proceed carefully, one step at a time. That night, I returned to my bedroom, the briefcase by my side. I traced the worn leather, inhaling the faint scent of Marianne Sepps's ink. They think grief makes me weak, I whispered aloud. But grief makes me precise. I cataloged each receipt, each bank slip, each crumpled note. The ledger grew, line by line, anomaly by anomaly. Each entry built a narrative of betrayal, but also a path to justice. and with Ethan's careful calculations, cross-references, and notes, I saw the shape of a plan emerging, one that would reclaim what was ours, expose the deception, and restore dignity. Before sleep took me, I imagined the moment Clara realized she had underestimated both me and Ethan. The thought was almost comforting, a quiet prelude to the reckoning we were meticulously preparing. April mornings in Atlanta carry a crispness that seemed out of place against the tension in my home. Ethan and I sat at the dining table, the briefcase open between us, its leather-worn edges softened from years of handling. Every rustle of paper felt like a heartbeat in the quiet house. "Grandpa, look at this account," Ethan said, pointing at a series of statements. "There's SEP's in escrow here, $35,872. It's SEP's hidden, but it's SEP's consistent with the withdrawals we traced last month." I nodded, running my fingers over the papers. "And this matches the crumpled receipts we cataloged. They thought hiding small amounts would go unnoticed." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "They sip sloppy. They leave patterns." I smiled faintly. "Patterns are what we live for, son. Every misstep, every signature out of place. It SEPs all data waiting to be interpreted." At that moment, a soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Albright, our neighbor, peeked in. "Alaric, Ethan," she said quietly. "Everything okay? You've been burning the midnight oil again." I waved her in. "Yes, Mrs. Albright, just sorting through old papers. Keeping busy." She nodded, but I caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the subtle understanding that we were uncovering more than just numbers. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said, before retreating, leaving the door slightly ajar, letting the faint spring breeze drift in. Ethan flipped through more documents. "Grandpa, there's SIP's a voicemail from Clara, March 10th. She admits to unauthorized withdrawals." I replayed it 3 times. I felt a chill. "Play it again. Every word matters." Her voice was casual, almost dismissive, but the undertone betrayed her. "Yeah, I moved the funds, but Dad wouldn't notice it's dust numbers." I let the paper slip from my hands, resting on the briefcase. Numbers indeed, but numbers tell stories when you know how to read them. Ethan traced lines between transactions, marking connections in his notebook. "And these utility bills, look at the patterns. Payments split across accounts, small deposits. Withdrawals, deliberate but predictable." I leaned closer. "Predictable, yes. That SIPs our advantage." Later, a small panic moment, I searched for a letter Marianne had referenced, an old investment note she'd left in the briefcase. I couldn't find it immediately, and my heart skipped. "Ethan, I can't find the letter," I admitted. He tilted his head, eyes sharp. "It sets here, Grandpa." He held it up, half hidden beneath a stack of bank statements. Just a slip, easy to overlook. Relief washed over me, mixed with the thrill of discovery. Every misplaced document, every red herring only reinforced the gravity of what we were uncovering. By mid-April, day by day, we built a meticulous ledger. Receipts matched bank slips, voicemails confirmed withdrawals, handwritten notes aligned with notarized confirmations. Even Clara's minor confessions became evidence. "Grandpa, look at this," Ethan whispered one evening. "The signature here, March 3rd, is subtly different from the one we verified in the briefcase. They tried to cover it, but we have proof." I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, and once we catalog everything, even a single misplaced signature will unravel the entire deception. At dinner, I let Clara and Derek chatter around me, pretending oblivion. "Did you check the backyard, Dad?" Clara asked casually, twirling her fork. I sipped my coffee. "Yes, lovely as always. The spring flowers, they remind me of Marianne." Her eyes flickered, almost guilt, almost doubt. Derek coughed nervously, glancing toward the briefcase in my office. Later, I reviewed the final set of documents with Ethan. Every bank slip, every crumpled receipt, every note, we have a narrative now. It set us complete, airtight. Ethan nodded, closing his notebook. "And the escrow, the voicemails, the letters, everything points to misappropriation. They left nothing untouched." I leaned back, running a finger over the briefcase lock. This briefcase, it Seps, not just leather and paper. It Seps, Marianne Seps' voice guiding us. Our blueprint for justice. Ethan smiled, tapping the papers. And soon it'll speak louder than they ever could. I exhaled, letting the weight of anticipation settle. April 2nd, the first bank inquiry was only days away. Everything was catalogued. Every anomaly, every hidden account, every small slip in their pattern, documented and ready. The house was quiet, except for the faint rustle of paper and the distant hum of Atlanta streets. But inside, a storm of revelation was building. Clara and Derek had underestimated both the briefcase and the grandson who could decipher its secrets. And I, Alaric Mercer, was ready to turn grief into precision, betrayal into proof, and deception into justice. April mornings felt heavier now, not with humidity but with tension. I stood in my office, tracing my fingers along the briefcase lock, listening to the faint click as Ethan slid it open. "Grandpa, the sequence on the lock isn't what I thought," he muttered, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I misread the last digit. Thought it was set 6. It said set, my bad." I nodded, a small smile forming. Even mistakes can teach us patience. Reset, then try again. We worked together, adjusting the combination until the briefcase clicked open perfectly. Inside lay letters, financial statements, and Marianne's notes. I carefully pulled out a stack of documents, flipping through each, absorbing the weight of years of planning. "Look here," Ethan said, pointing to a folded note. "Inheritance drafts. Drafted in your name, notarized before everything went wrong." I traced the lines with my finger, reading each paragraph aloud. They thought these drafts were lost in the shuffle, but we preserved them. That afternoon I placed subtle calls to the bank, inquiring about certain transfers. Derek's voice floated in my mind, low and conspiratorial. "If he finds out, we'll have to handle it." I had to smile at their arrogance. They believed ignorance was safety. Clara came in mid-afternoon, leaning against the doorframe. "Dad, are you still at it?" I looked at her, calmly sipping my coffee. "At what exactly?" "You know, the papers. The accounts." I placed a letter on the desk, letting it slide slightly toward her. "Oh, I know, and I sit him cataloging everything. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every unauthorized signature. Even your little confessions, Clara." Her eyes flickered. You've been listening?" "Observing," I corrected, keeping my tone neutral, "and documenting. You always underestimated me." Later, Ethan tapped a page. "Grandpa, look at this voicemail. Derek mentions an early withdrawal on March 28th, and Clara says she handled it. I think they didn't realize I could access archived messages." I smiled faintly, feeling the thrill of methodical progress. Red herrings everywhere. They try to mislead, but everything leaves a trace. We moved to the ledger, connecting dots. Bank transfers matched crumpled receipts. Voicemails confirmed unauthorized withdrawals. Notes and letters revealed hidden accounts, escrow funds, and misappropriations. Each discovery chipped away at Clara's confident facade. That evening, Clara confronted me in the kitchen, her voice sharp. "Dad, you you're obsessed. You shouldn't or dig through things that aren't yours anymore." I looked her directly in the eye. "Obsessed? No. Methodical. Everything here," I tapped the briefcase, "is ours, and we are only just beginning." She turned pale, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Derek stepped in. "Alaric, let's not make this dramatic." I nodded slowly. "Dramatic? Perhaps. Necessary? Absolutely." Ethan whispered from across the table. "Grandpa, every minor slip they make, every incorrect deposit, every overlooked receipt, it seps ammunition." I exhaled, feeling the tension in the room. "And we use it. Carefully. Lawfully. Precisely." The days blended into each other. Calls to banks, inquiries into past transactions, subtle confrontations where I tested their reactions. Clara flinched when she saw me making notes. Derek's tone became clipped during casual conversation, his confidence slipping ever so slightly. One evening I reviewed the briefcase documents alone, listening to faint voicemails layered beneath crumpled receipts. I felt Marianne's presence, her careful notes guiding my hand. The briefcase was more than evidence. It was a blueprint for justice. I leaned back, eyes closing briefly. They thought they had covered every angle, I whispered to myself. But the more they hide, the easier it becomes to find their patterns. Ethan sat beside me, pointing to a small note. Grandpa, remember some of these are distractions. Red herrings. We have to differentiate between what Sepp is real and what Sepp is planted to mislead us. I nodded. Exactly. And that's Sepp's why we move slowly, deliberately. We expose only what matters when it matters. Later, I overheard Clara on the phone. Sepp's been cataloging. I think he knows more than we expected. A faint smile tugged at my lips. Let them worry, I muttered. Our work is quiet, methodical, unstoppable. By the end of the week, the briefcase contained everything we needed. Inheritance drafts, financial statements, letters, receipts, voicemails, all cataloged, cross-referenced, and ready. Minor errors had been corrected, red herrings noted, patterns confirmed. I closed the briefcase, letting the lock click, the sound reverberating in the quiet office. This, I said to Ethan, is our leverage. Everything else is just noise. Soon they shall see that meticulousness beats arrogance every time. The spring light faded outside, but inside a storm of revelation was building. Clara and Derek had underestimated both the briefcase and the grandson who could decipher its secrets. And Alaric Mercer was ready to turn evidence into strategy, betrayal into proof, and deception into lawful justice. By mid-April, the tension in the house had grown almost tangible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of paper seemed magnified. I sat at the dining table, the briefcase open between Ethan and me, cataloging each discovery we'd made over the past weeks. Grandpa, look at this, Ethan whispered, pointing to a crumpled $12,345 withdrawal from February 18th. It went to that shell account we identified last month. I exhaled slowly. Every penny they thought was hidden is traceable. Every transaction leaves a mark. Clara walked into the room, pretending casual interest. What are you doing now? I looked up, calm, letting the weight of the briefcase speak for itself. Just making sure everything is in order. You know, for clarity. Her smile faltered. Derek appeared behind her, voice clipped. Alaric, you don't need to be obsessive about this. I tapped a receipt. Obsessive? No. Precise. And precise is what the law rewards. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, Grandpa, dear Sips, also the notarized confirmation from March 3rd. It links all withdrawals directly to them. They didn't cover it properly. I nodded, feeling a spark of grim satisfaction. Then we prepare filings. Step by step, lawful, deliberate, unstoppable. That afternoon I overheard Derek muttering on the phone. She sips cataloging everything. I don't know how much she sips seen. Clara whispered, We need a plan before he discovers more. I allowed a faint smile. They were unraveling, unaware that the web they'd spun was already caught in our ledger. Later, Ethan pointed out another anomaly. Grandpa, look here. Multiple transfers from hidden accounts align with crumpled receipts dated February 25th and March 12th. Someone's SIP's pattern is emerging. I traced my finger along the notes. Exactly, patterns reveal intentions, and once intentions are proven, justice follows. Clara confronted me in the living room that evening. Dad, this is ridiculous. You can do anything about it now. Just let it go. I stood, meeting her gaze. Let it go? Do you think I wouldn't notice? Do you think I don't see the trail of breadcrumbs you and Derek have left? Derek shifted uneasily. Alaric, please let Sips talk sensibly. I held up a crumpled receipt. This, and every other slip, is a record. You underestimated me, and you underestimated Ethan. But this ledger, it Sips proof. Ethan nodded, adding quietly, Grandpa, I double-checked everything. Even minor deposits are accounted for. We have the full picture. I felt a surge of calm triumph. Every document, every receipt, every voicemail was a step closer to exposure. The dominoes were ready to fall. That night, I organized the briefcase meticulously. Inheritance drafts, financial statements, letters, crumpled receipts, and voicemails all cross-referenced and ready. Marianne's notes, the voicemails we uncovered, and our ledger formed an unassailable chain. I whispered to Ethan. Soon they shall realize that arrogance can set out pace diligence. Ethan smirked. And the irony? They thought hiding small amounts would keep them safe. Instead, it sits there undoing. I leaned back, listening to the quiet of the Atlanta streets. Clara and Derek moved around, unaware that each small misstep, each moment of panic, had already been documented. The tension in the house was a prelude. Each whispered conversation, each mislaid document, each hurried note, all feeding into the chain of exposure we had meticulously prepared. By April 18th, when the first formal filings would be delivered, I felt prepared. Every crumpled receipt, every hidden account, every voicemail confession had been catalogued. The house, once quiet with grief, now carried the weight of imminent revelation. I closed the briefcase with a decisive click, the sound echoing in the office. This, I said to Ethan, is leverage. Everything else is noise. And when the dominoes fall, nothing can stop what sips coming. Ethan nodded, eyes bright. They won know what hit them. I exhaled, feeling a grim satisfaction. Grief had transformed into precision. Betrayal had become proof. Deception was now mapped, documented, and ready for lawful justice. And in the quiet of that evening, with the briefcase beside me and Ethan watching, I knew the dominoes had begun to fall, and there was no turning back. April 14th arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Atlanta, matching the tension that filled my home. The briefcase sat open on the dining table, papers fanned out like evidence at a crime scene. Ethan and I had spent the morning cross-checking every transaction, every crumpled receipt, and every voicemail. The ledger was immaculate, but even so, I felt the weight of what was coming. Clara Cetra's voice cut through the room. Dad, you Cetra being ridiculous. This obsession, it's Cetra's exhausting. I looked up calmly, letting my gaze meet hers. Exhausting? Perhaps. Necessary? Absolutely. Derek appeared behind her, arms crossed. Alaric, do you really think going through this will help anything? I tapped a crumpled receipt. Do you think I don't already know everything? Every slip, every withdrawal, every misstep? It's up to all documented. Yusef made this too easy. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I inhaled slowly. Meaning doesn't matter. Consequences do. Ethan whispered, pointing to a bank statement. Grandpa, look at this. March 12th. Another transfer we didn't set notice before. It sets minor, but it completes the pattern. I nodded. Minor mistakes reveal major truths. Keep cataloging everything, Ethan. Nothing is insignificant. That afternoon, a small slip in Clara Sip's behavior caught my attention. She misplaced a receipt she had intended to hide. Derek muttered under his breath. We can let him see that. I didn't move, only observed. Silence is a weapon, and in that silence, every flinch, every hesitant glance, every rushed gesture becomes proof. Later, Ethan and I sat reviewing the voicemail archives. Clara's voice was unmistakable. Move the funds, he won't notice. It's just numbers. Each playback reinforced the ledger, each annotation tightening the net around them. Clara tried again that evening. Dad, maybe you should rest. You been at this all day. I leaned back, letting the weight of my years and grief show in my posture. Rest? Perhaps later. For now I observe, I document, I prepare. Derek Sip's eyes narrowed. Alaric, you said her crossing a line. Be careful. I allowed a faint smile. Crossing lines? I sit merely walking the one you already blurred. Every action you took, I cataloged it, and it sips all leading somewhere. Ethan whispered, almost to himself. Grandpa, this tension, it's almost a living thing. We set her close. I nodded. Close to what? Close to justice? Close to truth? Close to restoring what was stolen? That night, I sat alone with the briefcase. The rain pattered softly against the windows, a rhythmic accompaniment to my thoughts. I traced Marianne's handwriting, inhaling the faint scent of her ink. Each letter, each note, each document was a voice from the past guiding me. I whispered aloud. They think confrontation is coming from anger, but it sets not. It sets coming from preparation, precision, inevitability. Ethan joined me quietly, pointing to a sequence of ledger entries. Grandpa, every overlooked signature, every misplaced note, it all tells a story. They can argue with that. I exhaled, the tension in my chest easing slightly. And when they finally realize it won't just be about money, it will be about accountability, integrity, and consequences. They ignored for too long. Later, as Clara and Derek moved through the house, their whispers carried through the hallway. He's watching everything, Clara muttered. Derek's response was muffled, anxious. I didn't need to hear more. The cracks were showing. Their carefully constructed facade was fraying, thread by thread. The briefcase sat between us, a silent sentinel, its worn leather, the faint scent of Marianne, the rustle of paper. It all reminded me that we were ready, ready to convert observation into action, suspicion into proof, tension into confrontation. April 18th loomed ahead. The first formal court inquiry. Every receipt, every crumpled note, every voicemail had been catalogued and verified. And yet, despite preparation, I felt the weight of anticipation pressing down, like the gray skies outside. I whispered to Ethan. We've done everything meticulously, but the hardest part is holding back until the right moment. Ethan nodded, eyes steady. And when that moment comes, Grandpa, we strike with precision. I leaned over the briefcase one last time that night, tracing the worn edges. This is no longer just about lost money. This is about respect, about justice, about proving that betrayal cannot thrive when patience and intellect are on your side. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the window pane like a metronome, counting down to the confrontation we had prepared for so meticulously. Clara and Derek had no idea how close the reckoning truly was. And in that silence I felt a grim satisfaction. Betrayal had shown its face. Lies had been exposed, and under these tense skies, the moment of reckoning was imminent. April 18th arrived with a brisk morning breeze in Atlanta, the streets quiet, almost holding their breath. I walked into the courtroom, briefcase in hand, leather worn and familiar, carrying decades of Marianne's meticulous planning and our own strategic diligence. Ethan was beside me, notebook tucked under his arm, eyes sharp. The courtroom was packed. Sunlight filtering through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Clara and Derek sat across from us, faces pale and tight. Their confidence from weeks ago had vanished into thin, anxious lines. The judge called the session to order. I took a deep breath, resting the briefcase on the polished oak table. Your Honor, I began, voice steady. What I present here is not emotion, it is evidence. Evidence of misappropriation, forgery, and deliberate concealment. Clara shifted, whispering to Derek. He actually brought everything. Ethan leaned slightly toward me. Grandpa, remember to stay calm. Let the documents speak. I nodded. Yes. I opened the briefcase carefully. The rustle of papers echoed in the courtroom. Letters, bank statements, crumpled receipts, notarized confirmations, and voicemail transcripts spilled out like a chronicle of decades. I held up the first document. This, I said, tapping a crumpled receipt, is a $12,345 withdrawal dated February 18th, unauthorized. Transferred to an account you will see labeled as a shell, one designed to obscure your activities. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Derek's hand twitched on the table. Ethan, confident, began projecting our ledger. Each entry corresponds to bank statements, crumpled receipts, and voicemails. For example, March 10th. Clara admits moving funds in a voicemail retrieved from archived records. Listen. A recording played. Clara Sipp's voice, casual, almost dismissive. Yeah, I moved the funds, but Dad won Sipp's notice. I held the judge Sipp's gaze. Numbers indeed, but numbers leave traces. Our lawyer, Miss Reynolds, presented notarized confirmations linking all withdrawals and transfers to Clara and Derek. She methodically showed account statements, receipts, and cross-referenced letters. Your Honor, she said, all actions are lawful, documented, and fully traceable. No dispute remains. Clara muttered, This can set be real. Derek tried to interrupt, voice shaking. Alaric, you don't sit. I cut him off gently. Derek, every step, every mistake, every attempt to cover has been documented. This isn't said about malice, it's said about truth, and the truth is now undeniable. Ethan, poised, presented the final piece, the inheritance drafts Marianne had prepared, notarized in my name, untouched and hidden in the briefcase. These drafts confirm rightful ownership, Your Honor, he said. They were ignored, concealed, or misrepresented by the defendants. The documentation leaves no ambiguity. A hush fell. The courtroom seemed to lean closer, every eye drawn to the spread of evidence on the polished table, the rustle of papers, the faint hum of the projector, the occasional cough, all underscored the gravity of the moment. Clara's shoulders slumped. Derek's jaw tightened. Every corner of their defense crumbled under meticulous documentation, crumpled receipts, hidden accounts, voicemail confessions, notarized letters, inheritance drafts. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, Miss Reynolds, the court acknowledges receipt of this evidence. The records are thorough, verifiable, and undeniable. I allowed myself a brief smile, glancing at Ethan. Grandpa, you did it, he whispered. I shook my head slightly. No, son, we did it, step by step, meticulously, lawfully. The opposing counsel tried a last-minute objection, claiming procedural ambiguity. Miss Reynolds countered calmly, pointing to cross-referenced receipts and notarized letters. Your Honor, she said, every claim has been addressed. No ambiguity exists. Evidence speaks for itself. Clear Sip's voice trembled. I never thought, Derek muttered under his breath. We underestimated them. I remained calm, letting the courtroom absorb the gravity. Every document, every crumpled receipt, every voicemail had its moment. The briefcase was more than leather and paper. It was Marianne's voice, Ethan's intellect, and our patience materialized. The gavel banged. Silence. Every eye fixed on the table. The judge scanned the documentation, flipping pages, nodding. This court finds the evidence compelling. Unauthorized withdrawals, misappropriations, and concealment have been demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt. Clara gasped. Derek Sett's hand flew to his forehead. Ethan whispered, Grandpa, Set's done. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight lift slightly. The tension in the room, the months of cataloging, cross-referencing, and decoding, all culminated in this single moment. Justice was no longer abstract. It was tangible, unfolding across the polished courtroom. The final twist revealed Ethan's intellect at work. A minor decoding error he had made weeks ago. The misread digit in the briefcase lock had initially masked a hidden set of transfers. Correcting it exposed a set of irregular accounts even Clara and Derek thought were concealed. Their confidence shattered. The Judge Sepp's voice cut through the tension. Funds will be restored. Ownership of inheritance drafts is affirmed. Penalties for misappropriation will be enforced. The court commends the meticulous documentation and ethical conduct of the plaintiff. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from remorse, but realization. Derek's face was pale, a mixture of shame and disbelief. I closed the briefcase slowly, letting the lock click. The sound reverberated like a final drumbeat, signaling the culmination of months of preparation, patience, and lawful precision. Ethan smiled quietly. Grandpa, we really did it. I nodded. Not the full place, Susan. Marianne did it. She left the blueprint. We only followed it. The courtroom emptied slowly. Observers murmured, glancing at the evidence, the briefcase, and us. The quiet satisfaction was overwhelming. Betrayal had been exposed. Lies had been catalogued and confronted. Justice, lawful and deliberate, had prevailed. And as we walked out into the soft spring sunlight, I whispered to Ethan, this briefcase, It carried more than papers. It carried proof, patience, and truth, and it reminded them all, underestimate diligence at your peril. April 18th, 9 a.m., Fulton County Courthouse. The morning air carried a brittle chill, a sharp contrast to the humid spring days I had grown accustomed to in Atlanta. I stood beside Ethan, the briefcase resting on the small table in front of us, its worn leather and brass lock glinting under the courthouse lights. This was it, the culmination of weeks of meticulous cataloging, analysis, and preparation. Every crumpled receipt, every unauthorized transfer, every hidden note, every voicemail had led to this room. Clara and Derek entered shortly after, their expressions carefully controlled, yet I caught the flicker of unease in Clara's eyes. Derek's jaw was tight, and his hands fidgeted beneath the table. Neither of them had anticipated how far I would go, how precisely Ethan and I had prepared. Your Honor, Miss Reynolds began, calm and commanding. We are prepared to present a detailed accounting of misappropriated funds, notarized confirmations, and supporting evidence directly linking the defendants to unauthorized withdrawals and concealed transfers. The judge nodded, adjusting his glasses. Proceed. I opened the briefcase carefully, the brass lock clicking in the quiet room. Ethan leaned over, hands steady, guiding my movement as I pulled out a stack of letters, receipts, and financial statements. I placed them on the table in sequence. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, everything you see here was meticulously documented. Every transfer, every misappropriation, every deviation from the proper accounts has been recorded and cross-referenced with receipts, bank statements, and notarized confirmations. Clara shifted in her seat, whispering to Derek. He actually did it. Derek whispered back, voice low, anxious. Stay calm, don't give him anything. Ethan clicked a small voice recorder, and a faint playback filled the courtroom. Clara Sipp's voice from March 10th, admitting unauthorized withdrawals. Yeah, I moved the funds, but Dad wants Sipp's notice. It's Sipp's just numbers. The judge raised an eyebrow. And this recording is verified. Yes, Your Honor, Miss Reynolds confirmed. Authenticity verified. The voice matches the defendant. The timestamp aligns with our ledger, and the transfer dates corroborate the claim. I exhaled, feeling a quiet thrill. The briefcase was no longer just leather and paper. It was truth incarnate. Next, Miss Reynolds continued, we present notarized letters from the estate confirming ownership of the disputed accounts and the authorization of funds prior to the misappropriations. I placed the letters carefully, letting them slide slightly toward Clara. She looked pale now, eyes flicking nervously at the documents. Derek's voice trembled as he muttered something inaudible. Ethan pointed to a ledger entry. Grandpa, March 3rd signature mismatch. We highlight this next. I nodded, reading aloud. March 3rd, 2025. Signature on transfer differs from notarized approval. Unauthorized withdrawal confirmed. Clara gasped softly, covering her mouth. Derek's hand twitched involuntarily. Miss Reynolds continued systematically, pulling voicemails, crumpled receipts, and letters from the briefcase in sequence. Each item corroborated the previous. Each fact, meticulously documented, left no room for doubt. The courtroom was silent. The only sound, the rustle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioning. I glanced at Ethan. His eyes were calm, confident. The young man had done what I alone could not: decipher the briefcase, follow the trail, and make the hidden visible. Clara finally spoke, voice shaky. Dad, this can set be. I met her gaze, steady. It can, Clara. You forgot that the briefcase remembers what you try to hide. Every misstep, every omission, every misappropriation, it sets here, all of it. Derek Sipp's shoulders slunk slightly. Alaric, we didn't set think you stut. Didn't us think I set notice? I finished for him, or didn't us think we set prepare? Miss Reynolds leaned forward. Your Honor, we also have witness testimony. Mrs. Albright observed certain anomalies, confirmed documentation transfers, and provided additional corroboration of suspicious behavior. These are included in the submitted affidavit. The judge nodded solemnly, reviewing the documents. It appears the evidence is extensive. Both defendants will have the opportunity to respond, but the documentation here is thorough. I placed the final piece on the table, Marianne's personal note referencing the emergency account she had hidden years ago. I held it briefly, inhaling the faint scent of her ink. She prepared for betrayal, I said softly, voice audible in the quiet courtroom, and we honored her foresight. The just way of true their scent. Ethan tapped my shoulder. Grandpa, look at their faces. They know the dominoes have fallen. I smiled faintly, a grim satisfaction warming me. Clara's hands trembled as she fiddled with her pen. Derek's confident facade had shattered completely. The judge looked up. Given the evidence, I am ordering a temporary freeze on all disputed accounts pending further proceedings. The defendants are to provide full disclosure of all transfers and associated documentation. Failure to comply will result in legal penalties. The courtroom murmured. Clara and Derek sank into their seats, the weight of their deception now fully exposed. I felt Marianne's presence in that moment, guiding me. As the briefcase, our shared legacy, stood open before us, bearing witness to truth, diligence, and preparation. Grandpa, Ethan whispered, a quiet triumph in his voice, we did it, every single piece fell into place. I nodded, letting my eyes rest on the briefcase. Yes, Ethan, every receipt, every letter, every crumpled note. Justice is patient, but it is inevitable, and today it speaks louder than fear or arrogance ever could. The courtroom remained hushed as Miss Reynolds collected the evidence for archiving. Clara and Derek avoided my gaze entirely. Derek muttered something under his breath, inaudible, but Clara's whispered apology, barely audible, was enough. I closed the briefcase gently, letting the lock click into place. The sound echoed like a gavel in my chest. The showdown was complete, the dominoes had fallen, and the first victory was ours. Not vengeance, but justice. Lawful, deliberate, precise. And in that quiet, I whispered to myself, they thought they took everything from me, but they forgot the briefcase remembers. The courthouse had barely emptied before the ripple effects began. By the time I returned home, news of the account freezes and the judge's preliminary ruling had spread quietly through our neighborhood. Mrs. Albright waved from across the street, her eyes wide but discreet. I nodded at her. She understood without words. Ethan and I set about organizing the briefcase again, ensuring every document, receipt, and voicemail was properly archived. Grandpa, he said, pointing at a ledger entry, the transfers we tracked, banks are freezing them as we speak. I smiled faintly. They thought moving money would protect them. Now it shields no one but the rightful owner. Clara called my office line that evening, her voice tight. Dad, this is unexpected. Can we talk? I allowed a pause, letting the gravity of her words settle. We can, Clara. But first you must understand the evidence does not lie. Every transfer, every unauthorized withdrawal, every note in the briefcase, it all proves the pattern. There was a long silence on the line, broken only by her faint sigh. I suppose you set her right. And Derek? I asked calmly. Her voice trembled slightly. He knows, we both do. There sits no hiding it now. The next day I noticed subtle shifts in the community's perception. Our neighbors, once casual observers, now treated me and Ethan with a quiet respect, sometimes nodding when we crossed paths. Even the local bank manager stopped by briefly, confirming that the frozen accounts were under scrutiny and that restitution processes were underway. Ethan leaned over the briefcase one afternoon. Grandpa, look at this. The community boards, the financial networks, everyone says starting to talk about the freeze. It says all documented. I nodded. Good. Let exposure work as leverage, not out of cruelty, but to restore balance. That evening, Clara and Derek entered my home hesitantly, standing at the threshold. Dad, we want to cooperate, Clara said softly. We shall provide all necessary documents, answer questions, we understand. I gestured toward the briefcase, letting it rest where it belonged. This isn't just about punishment, Clara. It's just about making things right. The transfers, the misappropriations, they have to be corrected. Everything else follows. Derek swallowed hard, voice low. We still do what SIPs required. No shortcuts this time. Ethan glanced at me, whispering, Grandpa, it SEP's working. They SEP's working, they SEP's were compliant. I exhaled, feeling the weight of tension ease slightly. Every document, every crumpled receipt, every voicemail had done its work. Justice wasn't instantaneous, but it was deliberate, precise, and unavoidable. Over the next few days, accounts were restored, misappropriated funds returned to their rightful places, and apologies, some reluctant, some whispered, began to trickle in. Clara's expression softened, not entirely free from guilt, but visibly aware of the consequences of her actions. Derek remained tense, eyes always flicking to the briefcase, aware that we had anticipated every move. Ethan sat beside me one evening, notebook in hand. Grandpa, the briefcase isn't just a container of evidence. It SEP's a symbol. Justice, resilience, and patience. I nodded, letting the leather and ink rest under my fingers. It sets Marianna's voice guiding us. Every rustle, every note, every carefully recorded document, it reminds us that diligence outlasts deceit. Clara approached quietly, placing a folder on the desk. Grandpa, here are all the remaining documents you requested. We SEP cross-referenced everything. I looked at her, the faintest trace of pride softening the anger I had carried for weeks. Thank you, Clara. Cooperation now matters more than hiding mistakes. Ethan whispered under his breath, a quiet note of satisfaction. Every domino fell, Grandpa, just as planned. I closed the briefcase gently, letting the lock click, a sound that had become both familiar and comforting. Outside, Atlanta's spring evening settled in, but inside the weight of betrayal had lifted slightly. The exposure had done its work. Justice was in motion. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, patience is more powerful than fear, and truth always finds its way. The weeks after the courtroom showdown were methodical, deliberate, and satisfying. By mid-May, the legal machinery had run its course. Misappropriated funds were fully restored to their rightful accounts, with interest and penalties applied. Clara and Derek had no path to reversal without implicating themselves further. Ethan and I sat in my study, the briefcase resting on the desk between us. Grandpa, it SIP's complete, he said, eyes bright with quiet triumph. Every transfer accounted for, every document verified. There SIP's no way to dispute it. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease. Lawful, deliberate, precise. That SIP's how justice works, Ethan. Not anger, not vengeance, but measured consequences for actions taken. Clara entered quietly, handing me a notarized receipt confirming restitution. Dad, everything SEP's restored. We complied. I looked at her, voice calm but firm. I expected nothing less. It sits not about punishment, Clara. It sits about accountability. You had the choice to do what was right, and now the law ensures it sits completed. Derek SEP's shoulders sagged. We understand, completely. I nodded, gesturing toward the briefcase. The evidence speaks for itself. Every crumpled receipt, every note, every signature, everything has been documented. There SIP's no ambiguity. The record is clear. Ethan whispered softly. Grandpa, the patience, the attention to detail, it all paid off. Seb restored balance. I leaned back, letting Marianne SEP's notes rest under my fingers. Justice isn't SEP's always swift. It's SEP's careful, it's SEP's deliberate, and it's SEP's earned through diligence, not rage. Later that week, I attended a meeting with Miss Reynolds to finalize filings, archive documents, and ensure that all penalties and restitutions were formally recognized by the courts. She looked at me with a quiet smile. Alaric, you've done everything meticulously. The record is airtight. Clara and Derek's misappropriations are fully accounted for. There's nothing left unaddressed. I nodded, feeling a weight lift. It sets not just about closure, Miss Reynolds. It sets about teaching accountability, about proving that betrayal, even by family, has consequences if observed carefully and handled lawfully. That evening I sat in my study, The briefcase closed but prominent on the desk. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Grandpa, look at them. Clara and Derek can undo what set's been done. They have to comply fully or face further consequences. I nodded slowly. Exactly. And that is measured justice. Not cruelty, not vengeance, just the natural consequence of deliberate actions. Clara approached quietly. Her demeanor softened. Dad, thank you for ensuring fairness. We understand now. I smiled faintly, letting the tension of weeks finally ease. Understanding is the first step toward integrity. You may not like the lessons, but the law and evidence never lies. Ethan whispered again, almost reverently. Grandpa, the briefcase. It seps more than a container of papers. It seps a testament to patience, diligence, and justice. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the journey lift. Betrayal had been confronted, deception exposed, restitution enforced, and consequences applied. I leaned over the briefcase one last time that evening, tracing the worn leather, patience, precision, and integrity. These are the measures of justice. Not anger, not vengeance, and in that balance is restored. Outside, Atlanta's spring evenings settled quietly, but inside I felt the echo of resolution. The evidence had spoken, and the law had listened. Justice, measured and complete, had prevailed. The house was quiet now. The storm of betrayal and exposure finally passed. I sat in my study, the briefcase resting at my side, Ethan leaning back in his chair, eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and relief. The sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting long, gentle shadows across the room. Grandpa, Ethan said softly, we did it. Everything sits restored. I nodded, running my fingers over the worn leather of the briefcase. Yes, Ethan, the inheritance Marianne sips notes, our dignity. Everything we preserved, everything we fought for, it sips ours again. Clara approached quietly, standing near the doorway. Dad, I know I caused pain. I see now what you were protecting and why. I smiled faintly. You didn't lose me, Clara, I said, voice calm but firm. You gave me a way into the hands of truth, diligence, and patience. That is what protects legacies, not greed or fear. Ethan glanced at me, a subtle grin tugging at his lips. So the briefcase, it's more than papers? I chuckled softly. More than papers, Ethan. It sets a reminder of what matters. Integrity, family, love, and the knowledge that patience and careful observation can reclaim what was nearly lost. I leaned back, letting the afternoon warmth settle in. The house smelled faintly of Marianne's ink, and the leather of the briefcase. Everything was in its place. Justice had been measured, dignity restored, and the legacy, our legacy, was reclaimed. I whispered to myself, a final confession, you didn't lose me, you gave me away. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a new rhythm. Clara and Derek maintained distance, their steps careful, their conversations polite but measured. Ethan and I worked quietly, cataloging evidence, ensuring every receipt, letter, and voicemail remained archived, a record of both betrayal and justice. One afternoon, Clara approached, holding a small folder. Dad, I wanted to thank you, she said softly, almost hesitantly, for your guidance, for making sure we corrected everything properly. I smiled faintly, letting her words settle. Guidance, yes. Mercy, yes. But forgiveness that takes time. Justice isn't a set cruelty, Clara. It sets accountability. Ethan whispered from across the table, notebook closed. Grandpa, they think they learned, but they don't realize the lesson runs deeper. I nodded, touching the briefcase. Exactly. They thought they took everything from me. All they gave me was a story worth telling, a story of patience, observation, and resilience. And that story is ours now. Outside, the neighborhood moved on quietly, unaware of the quiet victory inside. But I knew every careful decision, every documented misstep, every whispered confession had shaped a truth that would endure far longer than fear or greed. The following Sunday, The family gathered quietly in the sunlit dining room. Clara, Derek, and Ethan took seats around the table while I sat at the head, the briefcase closed but prominent at my side. Clara handed me a folded note. "Dad, this is for you. Thank you for everything," she said softly, almost unaware of the irony in her words. I smiled faintly, glancing at Ethan. "You thought you took everything from me," I said calmly. "But all you gave me was a story worth telling. A story of patience, diligence, and justice. And that story is mine to keep." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Grandpa, the briefcase really did more than contain papers. It contained lessons." I nodded, touching the leather once more. "Yes, lessons for everyone. Some learn consciously, some unknowingly, but in the end the legacy remains, integrity, preparation, and the truth always prevailing." Outside, the spring sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the room in a golden glow. The past had been confronted, betrayal addressed, and dignity restored. I closed my eyes briefly, whispering one final confession. They thought they took everything from me. All they gave me was a story worth telling.